Hello, fellow youths. This is our first segment of Real Film Reviews. This is Jason, and I have two fellow guests with me. Would you guys like to please introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Sam, and I like the color yellow.
Hi, I'm Kennedy, and I am out of breath every single time I enter the building.
Perfect. And on today's segment, we're going to be talking about Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. All right, I'm just going to open up to everyone. What did you guys think about the first Beetlejuice movie before going into Beetlejuice Beetlejuice?
About the first one, I will say I remember I saw it on a plane about a year ago, and I remember not loving it a whole lot. Like, I'm someone that goes in and usually goes into a movie for like the story, and it reminded me a lot of kind of like a story that's built around the world and the kind of antics that surround the world, not necessarily the story. It was kind of how I felt.
I am a Tim Burton fan, so just from that, I feel like I really like his style and sort of the wacky characters I always find like really interesting to watch. So I'm a fan of the first one. I think there's definitely like some humor in there that's outdated and a little problematic now. but I do like it. I think that the way he thinks about the afterlife, I think, is very funny, and I kind of I think it's
I was gonna say, and it feels very Tim Burton like even in this movie as well. But like when you see it, like everything's just kind of like slightly off and corrupted, and it's like very Tim Burton.
Yeah, and the lighting in that movie is crazy.
Yeah.
Like there's always like a color filter or like something.
Yeah, everything's kind of always
times.
blue or green.
Yeah. It's very distinct. It's very fun. I remember enjoying the whole thing.
Yeah, I will say I do agree with Sam, especially how like the film itself, like it is very outdated in a way, and adding on top of that, I think there's a big nostalgia factor when it comes to the first Beetlejuice movie. I remember before seeing the second movie, I just saw a summary recap of it, and for a movie called Beetlejuice, they talked about Beetlejuice like maybe like one time, and then after looking it up, he was in it for like 5
Yeah,
minutes.
it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Because they did the same thing with this movie intentionally, I heard as well, where like throughout the whole movie, he gets like 12 minutes of screen time in this one as well or something like that. Like it feels like when you look back on it, he's in the movie for longer in this one, but if like you're actually watching it and timing it out, he's not actually in the movie for as long as you think it is.
I actually did not catch that for the second movie. I thought he was in it a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense though, because if you're gonna have Beetlejuice around, he's such a high energy character that it gives you that impression where like he's only in it for however many minutes, but it makes it feel like the whole movie's
really
about him.
He takes the scene.
Yes, he does. He steals the whole movie, and I think if he was in it for more than that, I think it would go like, okay, this is too much. Like this is,
and it's also
so
like interesting,
high energy.
like with the amount of time that he's not in the movie, it still makes him like he's a very high character, but he's also still somehow like a very mysterious character in his chaos, right?
Yeah.
And I think the time that he's given very much adds to that.
Yeah. Which, by the way, one thing that was really apparent to me coming out of that movie, the second one, was Michael Keaton. He's like, how old is he now? He's so old, and I feel like it was the same character. It was like they had filmed
60s or 70s.
Yes,
yeah.
It is like they had filmed the original.
Because it came out like right after Tim Burton's Batman as well.
Yeah. It felt like it was like his performance. It felt like it was filmed right after the original Beetlejuice. Like it felt right back, which I actually was kind of surprised by. I thought there'd be like something different to it, but it is like the exact same Beetlejuice, which I think is really he did a good job.
Chaos and very cool.
Yeah. Again, it's hard because it's like high energy. Like I don't know how many takes he had to do for each scene, but it's so like he has to be so loud and quick and fast, and I just imagine that would be a lot, but he nailed it.
I feel like it also makes you wonder like how much of the scenes were improvised with how chaotic
he
was.
That's
like,
a good
you have
thought.
to assume it's probably like a lot, but also at the same time, like a lot of the movie's probably scripted too. So it's like it's one of those things for every movie where I was like thinking like I wonder how much of this was like actually the writers and how much was the actors just having fun.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with that. I think I saw somewhere for the first Beetlejuice movie, a lot of the time it was just Michael Keaton just saying whatever he wanted. And at times it was the couple that died, like they had no idea what was going to come next after like a different take because he would just say something completely random. And I think maybe his short amount of screen time makes sense because if he was in it for so long in the movie, we would probably get annoyed in
Yeah.
a way. So I think maybe them giving Michael Keaton's Beetlejuice in small doses
Mhm.
could have been an intention,
Yeah.
honestly, at that point.
He was also, I might be saying a lie about this, but I heard at some point that for the first Beetlejuice, he was actually like only on set for like 2 weeks or something like that. Like they shot all of his films because they were all mostly just on like the miniature town set, right?
Oh yeah.
But they shot like all of his scenes in like 2 weeks, and then he was out of there, like, which is kind of crazy. From,
That
like,
is
a film
crazy. I
perspective.
didn't think about that. You're right. He's small for most of that movie.
Yeah.
Like, so he would film it just by himself.
Yeah, and that's also another thing where like you've got to be very talented to
Yeah.
act like on your own to nothing.
Yes,
Like,
and still
there's-
have that energy.
Yeah, it somewhat reminds me of a scene. Like I'm a huge Lord of the Rings nerd. These people know, but there's a behind the scenes shot of Sir Ian McKellen playing Gandalf in The Hobbit, where he's like with the dwarves, and behind the scenes he wasn't able to be with any of them because it's all forced perspective. And so there's like a scene of him like kind of having a mental breakdown because of that, and it gives me more respect for all those people that have to act like on their own to like just sticks with heads, right? Like
Yeah.
that kind of acting is insane.
Yeah, it reminds me of I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but Jamie Lee Curtis was like asked something to do with Marvel, like if she would ever do a Marvel movie if she was like on it, and she goes, "No, I don't think I would because I'd be too afraid that they'll make me that they'll stick little white balls on me and make me act in a room by myself." And I was like, "That's so yeah, I'd be afraid of that too."
It's crazy to think about, like, not from like Beetlejuice, but like in movies today, like there's so many like CGI driven films, and when you're looking at the behind the scenes, the actors are just in a studio, just talking to like floating like inanimate objects, and you're trying to have like a conversation with them, and you're like, how do I know how they're gonna respond because they do the recording and stuff after each other, so.
Yeah, and something to kind of add on to that was like a lot of movies nowadays very much lean into special effects and like computer graphics. But with this one specifically, they used like almost all practical effects.
Yes,
I
they
think that's
did.
something
Oh,
we're
that's
talking
such a
about.
that is such a good point. I actually really loved that in this second one. I thought it was so fun to watch.
That's one thing I don't think Tim Burton will ever move away from. That his whole like the claymation thing.
Mhm.
That's what made Nightmare Before Christmas so like special. And this one, I don't know if you guys remember the sequence where the dad from the first movie, they didn't bring him back for a specific reason that
Oh
I'll
yeah,
get
I
into.
know about that too.
But how they wrote him off was
Mhm.
done completely through claymation. So I'm glad
Yeah.
he got to bring that talent
Yeah.
from his other
Yeah.
movies onto
And
this
even
one.
when they like brought him back technically like as a person in the film, they specifically took him out with practical effects, right? Like where they like, I don't know, it's probably safe to talk about it because we're talking
it's
about
been
the
so long.
movie.
Yeah, no, you can.
It's the like shark bite where they're like
Yeah.
he's still in the movie and he's playing his character, but you just don't see his face at all, right? Technically.
Exactly.
So it's very interesting the way they like cut him out was like all very practical effects as well.
Yes, and I didn't know why he wasn't in that movie until actually way later.
I feel like a lot
And-
of people were that way.
Yes,
like,
but that's what kind of made it perfect though, was because it was so wacky. Like, okay, the character's still in the movie, but we can't use the same actor, so we're gonna put him in as like just a body with no head, and then
Yeah.
get somebody to do his voice, and then the background of him, his story is all claymation, which is crazy. But then in a movie like this, what I think is so just like, it goes back to like the fun of Tim Burton sort of style. Is like you can do something that weird, and then I didn't even clock it that it was like a choice to cover something up.
Yeah.
I did not even realize that until later, and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. But I didn't even realize.
No, Tim Burton is really unique. So after talking about Michael Keaton, after talking about Tim Burton, what were you guys' thoughts about Winona Ryder coming back for this role specifically?
I thought she was really good. I know she's in a lot of Tim Burton movies. She was in Edward Scissorhands, and she was in what other Tim Burton? I think she's been in more than that
I
though.
think
Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands.
I don't know.
Edward Scissorhands, I think, is Winona Ryder. Is the love interest in that movie?
I haven't seen Edward Scissorhands.
Me neither.
Really?
If I'm being honest.
Oh, I think you guys would actually.
Most
really
of
like
my Tim Burton knowledge mostly comes from his stop motion movies because I think
Oh,
the
yeah.
stop motion really
Yeah.
lends to his world building.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's all I had to say about
You
it.
guys like this is slightly off topic. So the Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah.
That was like, heavily influenced by Tim Burton, but he did not direct it. Henry Selick directed that movie.
Oh, I
See?
not know that.
See? Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Because
He
it
did
always
not.
says from Tim Burton.
Yes, Tim
Yeah.
Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. He did not direct that movie. Henry Selick directed that movie, who's the same guy who directed Coraline.
Okay. Do you know why they put his name in front of it then?
I think it's just because
he's more well known.
I remember finding this out for the first time and being like, what?
That's crazy.
I was like, my favorite Tim Burton movie isn't a Tim Burton movie. And I was like, who is Henry Selick?
Did he
And-
write it?
Yes. So I remember looking it up, and I guess I could double check right now, but I'm pretty sure it's called Tim Burton's because it was based off of a poem and an illustration that Tim Burton did. So it's like his concept, and that's why it's
Okay.
called Tim Burton's, but it was not directed by him.
How heavily involved was he in that movie?
I think he also was a producer on it.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So yeah, it would make sense, but I just think that's like a wild fact.
Now, speaking of the other lead of the movie, the new character,
Yeah.
what was your thoughts on Jenna Ortega's character playing Winona Ryder's daughter in this film?
I'm gonna let you talk first.
Okay, I feel like I didn't have as many thoughts on this, but I did feel like I wasn't as invested in her character because she acted like a very stereotype of just a grumpy teenage girl, was my opinion of it. She didn't feel very complex or deep. I just thought she was just kind of there, and that was my opinion on her character, but I thought she played the character well.
Okay, I agree with that. That's what I heard from most people too. And I guess I'll say, like, in her defense, I think that it's the hardest to play a normal person. I think, like, if you're an actor who's given something, like, just be the weirdest person possible and
Yeah.
just yell random things, like Beetlejuice. I feel like it's easier. Like, it takes more energy, but I think it's easier to do that. Whereas if someone tells you, like, just be a regular teen, then it's, like, way harder for you to, first of all, like, draw attention to your character. And it's kind of, so I feel like the fact that she kind of, faded into the, like, she's just like a regular kind of, people were like not that deep of a character. I think it
her
makes
decisions
sense.
throughout the movie very much made sense. Like there's a lot of decisions, like character choices throughout the movie that I just sat there and was like, okay, I get why they're making the choice, but it's like stupid, right? Like when she accepts the wedding proposal and like all those other things just throughout the movie, where it's like, okay, I guess I understand why you're doing it, but that's like just stupid to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I completely agree with that because especially before she made that really big decision, all of her choices were actually pretty smart. Like she was like, there's definitely like people in movies that just make like stupid decisions. She was definitely not one of them until that one decision where she decides to marry.
Yeah,
that
but then
dude.
you also get like this purchasing the snakes from her mother, where it's like, okay, I get why, but that was kind of dumb, and there's a lot of like character choices throughout where I just feel like the decision wasn't very realistic, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the thing about Tim Burton movies. I don't think realism is one thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
I will say the one thing about Jenna Ortega, I thought he picked up. The casting was actually done really well. Especially, have any of you guys seen Wednesday? any
Yes.
chance?
Yeah, I did.
I feel like their prior projects. I bet when Tim Burton like saw Wednesday, he was like, she just fits this movie.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because now he's directing a bunch of episodes for season 2 of Wednesday. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure there was a
And
connection
he
there
directed
somehow.
most of season 1, right, of Wednesday?
Did he?
I thought he did.
Oh, I
wouldn't
don't know.
for sure. I didn't watch
Yeah.
Wednesday. I think I just heard that.
I just heard the news about season 2. Really, that was really
Okay.
I do think like her like overall personality just matched the town, especially
Yeah.
that they were
Yeah.
in. Especially her and Winona Ryder. I feel like their chemistry, like they had like the same attitudes pretty much. Especially if you go back to when Winona Ryder was 16.
Yes.
In the
Mhm.
first
That's
film.
what I was gonna say.
First of all, she was that young. She wasn't that big, which is making the Beetlejuice and her relationship a little weird.
Oh,
But-
it was weird. The whole. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. I think even
Well, I
when
think
it
it was
was.
intentionally.
Yeah,
weird,
yeah,
too.
yeah. When it first came out, it was weird.
But no, I felt like there were a lot of similarities between how Jenna Ortega's character acted in this movie compared to how Winona Ryder's character acted in the first movie, and I thought
Yeah.
that was a pretty good choice, and I thought casting really had a big factor in that.
Yeah.
So going into the tangent of Beetlejuice, we heard your thoughts about how you guys thought about the first Beetlejuice movie. Did any of that change for the sequel, or did it stay the same?
I honestly like the second one more than the first one.
Oh.
I thought it was so much fun the entire time. I was so entertained. And my favorite part of this movie, like hands down my favorite part, is Willem Dafoe as this detective actor. My favorite part of the movie, I could like every time he was on screen, I laughed so hard and I just wanted him to be in it more. I thought little bits here and there of just those things made it so much fun.
I completely forgot about his character, but you brought up
Yes.
a really good point. Willem Dafoe
He
was
sneaks
really
in
good.
there. I didn't even know
He's
he
a
was
fun
in it.
character. I will say, I think I liked this better than I liked the first one, but I didn't super love the first one. And I think I'm kind of iffy on whether I actually do like this one fully. But I think story-wise, it could have used one more rewrite, because the way I look at it was it felt like they had like
agree.
3 different stories that they like went into the movie wanting to tell, with Beetlejuice's ex and Willem Dafoe's character, and like the whole thing in the mortal realm of like the dead taking the the human's place, right?
Yeah.
It felt like they came into the story with 3 different stories that they wanted to tell, and I think they probably should have just cut 2 of those, or at least ingrained 2 of those stories into the same story somehow.
I really agree with that. I think that my thought on, like, out of the, you feel like it was like 3 different ones. I kind of agree. It was probably 3 different storylines going on. I think the one that really I keep forgetting about was Monica Bellucci, the ex-wife. And the ex-wife line, I agree with you. Like, it didn't matter at all in the end. Like, no, she didn't. And it kind of, to me, makes me think like Tim Burton is. I'm pretty sure they're in a relationship.
They're married.
Okay,
Yeah,
so they got married, and I think this is just like Tim Burton like pulling her into one of his projects, even though it's like, why is she there?
Yeah, she didn't add anything to the story.
No, yeah, I feel the same way.
I feel like neither, like, story-wise, I loved not story-wise. Character-wise, I loved Willem Dafoe. I feel like story-wise, he didn't contribute a whole lot.
But he contributed so much, Sam. He needed to be there.
I mean, I could be wrong.
I will say, as someone who didn't really, I actually did rewatch. I just watched the first one after I saw the second one. I'll be like, all right, maybe the recap didn't do it justice. I watched it, and maybe it was just like the times now, since I didn't watch it when I was a kid, I was really bored with the first one, if I'm being completely honest. But the second one, I'm gonna be honest, I was like at least entertained throughout the entire movie. There wasn't like a moment where I was like checking my phone and be like, oh, when is this movie going to end? I thought for like I don't know if I can even say children's horror movie, because there were some jokes that were pretty out of pocket, which I'm pretty sure all the adults, the like teenagers caught, which I thought were like pretty funny. But at the same time, that's probably who their target audience could have been. The people who maybe like grew up with this movie, and then when they got older, saw all those jokes, they can actually understand it now. But I was really entertained with this movie. I thought like, oh, it was a good like Halloween holiday type movie where you can just go out, just watch it, and just have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to think super deeply about it. But it was like, oh, it was a fun movie. Would I watch it again? Maybe like during like the Halloween season, I'd maybe watch it like for kids or something like that. But it's not like a deep dive analysis movie. It was just like a fun time movie. And at the end of the day, when it comes to movies like this, I'm completely okay with that.
Yeah, yeah. I am a huge fan of, just Halloween in general. But then within that, I'm much more of like a spooky film person and not a horror film person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a big difference actually.
And I think that is why I also love Tim Burton movies, because they're perfectly in that, where I'm like, I love Halloween and I want to watch movies that kind of get me in that mood and talk about Halloween and all that fun stuff that aren't horror, because, sometimes,
spooky, not
I'm like, sometimes it's like 5 p.m. on a Thursday and I just want to like relax and watch a movie, and I'm like, a horror movie is not going to fill this void.
Growing up, at least, I've gotten better about it, but I used to not be able to stand horror, like, at all. Like, I remember one of the stories I tell people is I went in to see the second Maze Runner movie, Scorch Trials, and, like, they build the suspense up really well in the beginning of the movie when they enter that, like, abandoned warehouse, and I turned off the movie, like, as soon as it got there. I was like, I can't handle this. I'm like going to have nightmares about this for the next week. I turned it off. I was like, I'm saving myself now.
Yeah. So it's I think it perfectly there's like such a audience for this type of spooky movie.
And it's very much a Tim Burton style, right?
Yeah.
Like where he doesn't do horror, he does spooky, and the spooky he does is like world building, and it's very cool world building.
Yes, I was gonna say that. Like, I think it's rare in recent years to go into a movie theater and watch something that truly feels so different. And I feel like when I watched this movie, I was like, wow, like this was like so creative. Like I was like, this afterlife that he's set up from the first movie and they like expanded on it was so like fun and different. And, like there's weird snakes. Like the rules of this world are so unique and interesting.
And it feels so alive. Like you'll be seeing something on screen that's as simple as like a DMV joke, and you still can't help but sit there and wonder and be like, I wonder what else is going on around the rest of this world, because it feels living.
Yeah.
Right? Like it feels like, even though it's a dead world, right? It feels like a place where like, oh, if I go there, like things will be happening, which like you don't see a lot with stories now, where like a lot of current day movies, they're just kind of like focusing on the story and they don't focus on the world building. So a lot of the times you'll be sitting there like, especially with Star Wars right now, where it's like, I see what's going on right in front of me, but I feel like as soon as we leave this moment, nothing is going to happen in this location ever.
No, like adding on to that, I said something about like, oh, we don't really take Tim Burton's movie and think about like realism. But I guess there's really a difference between like realism and like feeling alive. And I think the biggest thing with that is like the practical effects.
Yeah.
They use for this movie, like the prosthetics. Like there's not really that many computer graphics effects in this film. Like all the miniatures, or like they're all like really detailed sets, which makes you wonder like, I wonder what like happens in this world, like you said. But when you're watching something that's like super like computer effects heavy, you're just like, oh yeah, that's not real. I really don't care what's going on in the background.
And I will say, like, there's moments where it felt like the practical effects, not events, the practical effects look so cool in the story that like when you see the computer generated ones, it kind of like almost feels cheap, because like the whole scene where Beetlejuice's ex is like reassembling herself is pretty much mostly like computer graphics, I thought. And that just, like, it felt cheap compared to, like, the scenes where we see the dead husband walking around with a shark bite, right, out of his whole head. It's like, so that's how I felt about, like, the computer graphics, was, like, it felt cheap next to seeing the practical effects.
Yeah, I will say the one scene that, like, kind of got me was his exploding guts in the therapy room when you brought I remember seeing that in the trailer. I turned away. I was like, nope.
For me, it's the and I keep coming back to this, where I'm like, the only reason that it didn't like lose points for me was because it was so cartoonish that I'm like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
But the weird pregnancy stuff.
Oh, that was pretty creepy.
I
there
blocked
is
that
like
out of my mind.
I'm glad to hear like you guys feel the same way about that sort of stuff, because for me that is such a specific like subset of things that I cannot handle. And so for that to be in there, I was like, oh, but it was because it's so outlandish and cartoonish and quick, then I'm like, they get away with it. Like, it's not too bad. It's creepy and it's weird, but that's Beetlejuice and it makes sense. And then they move on. If it was like too much, I would have been.
I at least like that a lot of the gags, like if it was too much for you, they moved on fast.
Yes.
Right? I will say that one scene was a little grotesque, especially like you have the little Beetlejuice baby.
Oh, God.
Flies, like circling around it.
Oh,
And
no.
like,
yeah.
Yeah, what rating was this movie, actually? I'm kind of curious. Was it PG or PG-13?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, which
I don't know.
Look up.
You're looking it up?
That's a good question, actually. Oh, it was PG-13.
Okay.
I feel like that makes sense.
That does make sense, yeah.
I think going into it, I thought it was just like PG, but then after hearing like all the jokes and all the graphics, I was like, this is like borderline PG-13 rating, honestly.
I feel like in the last 2 years, we've almost seen like a weird blurring between PG and PG-13 as well. So it makes it that much more complicated from a culture standpoint.
I think the biggest factor, this is going off completely, or it's like probably like superhero movies, because they would be like PG-13, but parents would like still take their children to go watch them, because like, oh, it's a comic book character. How it can't be that bad? It's just a child. Yeah. It's made for them. So I think that was a big factor. One thing I really want to touch on before we end, I thought the soundtrack for this film was so good.
I can't believe we got this far and I didn't mention. So the first movie, they sing that song Deo is in it, and she's like lip syncing it, and they all dance to it, right? That's such a big thing. And for them to do a children's choir of that song, I cackled in that theater. I thought it was so funny.
It was for the funeral.
I know, it was so funny. Oh my god! And I think that they're like British children too, which to me just takes it up. Like it just makes it infinitely funnier to me. It is. It's so true. Like you make a British child do anything, and I just find it funny. And so like them singing Deo, so funny. I and still legit. This is not a joke. I added that to my playlist, the children's choir version of that song. And I listen to it as I walk to class because it puts me in a good mood because I'm laughing so hard.
I will say the one song that was probably like stuck in my head for like a week after watching that movie was the Tragedy song. It's the one where his ex bride was like looking for him. in the world.
I should re-listen to it.
Yeah, that song got into my head. It was also on like every TikTok edit of the
Oh,
movie
is it?
The Tragedy song, but
I know.
Cool, I should re-listen
The
to it.
soundtrack they like reused or at least like revamped from the original
Yeah,
too.
and it's a good theme, the Beetlejuice theme.
Mhm.
Like you recognize it instantly, and it's nice.
yeah, Tim Burton, the composer Danny Elfman, those two
I
have been a
love
pair
Danny.
Yes.
for anything about Batman, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
They've been a pair that you don't want to mess with.
Yeah.
Nightmare Before Christmas apparently wasn't Tim Burton, but Danny
Yeah.
Elfman did
Yeah,
that too.
yeah.
So,
But no, if you guys were to give like a rating out of 10 for this film, what would you give it?
I would give it, like, if you're a Tim Burton fan, I would give it a 9 out of 10. It would be a 10 out of 10 if it didn't have so many storylines going on. I feel like for sure, like if you took the ex-wife out of it, it's a better movie. And so I think because it's got a little too much going on, it's a 9 out of 10, but it's still like, it's a blast. It has everything that you want from a Tim Burton movie. It gets you in like the Halloween spirit. I loved it.
yeah, I think if you like Tim Burton, you're going to like this movie. If you don't like him, it's probably going to be like a pretty average movie is my thoughts on it. Like it's just something that you kind of sit there and it's like, okay, I get what's going on and there's some fun bits, but there's also some bits I don't get, especially. So I think for that reason, I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10, I guess.
My rating before you guys both said it was actually right in the middle. I would probably give this movie an 8 out of 10. As someone who did not really enjoy the first Beetlejuice movie, I walked into it with like no expectations really. And I had a fun time. It was enjoyable. I didn't check my phone to see when the movie was going to end. And I left the theater and I was like, wow, that was a pretty fun movie. There were some jokes that I actually laughed at. Was I going to remember this film like a week later? Probably not. But if you're a Tim Burton fan, like especially for a movie that the sequel that came out, how many years later? Like 30
Oh, yeah.
years later? I think it like holds up to the standard that the people who really enjoy the first one
Yes.
had.
I think it's better than the first one. Like, genuinely. Which, how often does that happen, you know?
The only one I can really think of was like Top Gun Maverick.
Oh, we got to do an episode about that. I could talk for an hour about that. Yeah.
We're gonna make another one actually. That movie
Really? Are they?
made way too much money not to.
True.
I really like that one. I feel like there's decent places where they can take the story as well after that.
And that was our first segment of Real Film Reviews.
Yay!
Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice. I am your podcast host, Jason.
I'm Sam.
And I'm Kennedy.
We will see you on the next segment of Real Film Reviews, which will be Joker 2.
Oh, okay. I'm actually excited about that.
So we'll see you guys next time. Go Utes!
Woo!
Woo!